Today we're going to be talking about beginnings and endings. We're going to start naturally with beginnings. Writing a good beginning. The beginning of your story will hook your readers. If a story starts out and is boring, why would anyone want to keep reading? Similarly, if your ending is weak, your reader will leave your story with a sour feeling. One of the things that I am a really big fan of is starting in the middle of the action. My Midwest likes to call that in media res. There should be an ongoing situation already in place before the opening of your story, and you drop your readers right into it, right in the middle of the action. There should be a crisis and a character introduced immediately, and your reader asks themselves, basically, what the heck's going on here? Think of that season 1, episode 1 of Gravity Falls. We are dropped right into the middle of the action. Dipper is crashing through the forest in a golf cart. This huge thing, this huge monster is following him. And there's a lot of yelling and action and crashing of trees. And we are dropped right into the middle of the action. That's a really great way to hook your readers. It gets them involved. It gets them to invest in that character. They want to see the character come through whatever the heck this is and come through okay. And it also is a good chance to introduce your character in how that character handles this situation is a great introduction to that. I'm a big fan of these kind of dropping into the middle of the action kind of beginnings. It's not the only way to do it, of course, but it's one way I advocate. If it fits your story, you shouldn't think twice about doing it. And why is that? Well, because your readers, your potential audience, has a lot more limited attention span than the one that was present for the readers when, let's say, Lord of the Rings first came out. J.R.R. Tolkien was able to take a little bit more time with their opening and let that evolve and unfold, and he could luxuriate in some world building. That was a different reader attention span. Your reader attention span, the one that you have to deal with, is a social media attention span, right? Your reader, your potential audience for whatever the story you're telling, is sitting in front of a constant smorgasbord of content, being whatever social media they're linked into right now, whether that's Twitter, Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, okay? They're sitting in front of a constant smorgasbord of content. And if something doesn't lock them in like 4 seconds, it goes by and the next one comes through. There's going to be another cat video coming down the pike any minute now. That doesn't mean you necessarily have to hurry yourself, but it does mean that in the opening pages, the opening scenes, the opening sentences of your work, you really need to think about how you're going to hook that reader, how you're going to compel the reader to continue reading. Because, again, there's going to be a cat video coming along in another 4 seconds. That's what you're competing with. So you really can't luxuriate in a whole bunch of world building. We're going to get to that in a little bit. Here are some ways to begin. You can introduce a character. You can give us a place or describe a setting. You can raise a question. Better yet, you can present a crisis. Here's a few really good openings to some novels, all right? This one's a good opening because it's attention grabbing. Quote, "The strangest thing about my wife's return from the dead was how other people reacted," unquote. That's from The Beginner's Goodbye by Ann Tyler. That's a fantastic opening, right? It completely blindsides you. And it's, what, 2 sentences there? 1 sentence, okay? The strangest thing about my wife's return from the dead. Boom, you got me. I got to find out more about this wife. Was how other people reacted. That 1 sentence sets up a really, really interesting, compelling situation that I want to find out more about. Here's another way. It's a visceral opening. mentioning a strong smell or taste, something that gets you right in through your sentences. Or I'm sorry, through your senses. Sometimes a good opening asks a question. Here's one from the great Terry Pratchett. Why was it, Tiffany Aching wondered, that people liked noise so much? That's from I Shall Wear Midnight. It's a really good, it's a wonderful question. Why do people like noise so much? And it also sets up kind of a compelling situation that I want to know more about. Also, let's take a look at old Leo Tolstoy in Anna Karenina, who writes his opening in an aphorism. All happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way, unquote. Those are fantastic openings, all for different reasons. And again, your opening doesn't have to fit a formula or a cookie cutter. These are all basically these are all ingredients that you can pick from, and some things to maybe start your creative juices flowing. To say, okay, what's my opening going to be? Well, I've got these options, and of course you've got other options that you can create on the fly. The basic job of a strong opening is that it entices and engages the reader and sets the tone for the entire story. It creates expectations for your reader, and remember, nothing is wasted, nothing is random. A good opening appeals to the senses, shows a need or motive or a want, those things that we've talked about before, presents an action, uses an object that is or will become symbolic, have a character description, have a thought like the opening of Pride and Prejudice, prepare your readers for what to come. It's the point of entry for your story, so it must lead to something. Now, you don't have to do all of those things. You don't have to, this is not a checklist. These are just some really good things to have in mind as you're writing your opening remarks, your opening sentence. Now, here's something you don't want to do. You don't want to start with world building. You don't want to start by saying, basically, setting up the social political structure of the world that you're going into and laying out a geographical map and so on and so forth. My advice to writers all the time is to keep your readers on a need-to-know basis. That world building is important, but you can parcel it out as it's needed to understand the next sentence or the next paragraph. You can parcel that out. In fact, that's how it can be parceled out as part of the story. It's embedded into the story. It's woven in. These things come spilling out piece by piece. There's no better way to lose readers than if you start with an info dump, with page after page after page of, okay, here's what you got to know to understand my story. In graphic novels, this is always the long shot. It's something I kind of hate. It's always the long shot. You always, if it's a space story, you always start with all these planets, and then you get, this is the planet such and so, and its economics is based on string beans, and it's got a political system of this, and it's got a geography of this. It's all of this information dump that gets just, and it's narration box after narration box. Nobody likes to read comics with tons of narration boxes, right? It's the same thing for anything else you're doing, whether you're writing a story, whether you're telling a story orally. A information dump is the greatest way to lose readers. Lose their interest immediately, because let's face it, at this point you're reading a textbook. And nobody likes to read a textbook. That's why they make you pay so much for them. To add insult to injury. Your job as a writer is to entice that reader, especially in the first pages. You've got no time for information dump. Keep your readers on a need-to-know basis and parcel that world building out as part of the plot. Build it into the plot. You'll find you'll have much, much better results. Now, jumping ahead, let's talk about the end. In the same way that there's ways to write good beginnings, there are ways to write good endings. All right? What's a good ending? A good ending should fit with the beginning some way. Remember to end strong. Nothing's worse than reading a good story that has an ending that makes you regret reading it. Here are a few types of endings. You've got a circular ending. It repeats the opening, reflects the beginning in a way. For example, open with a death, end with a death. We've got lots and lots of examples of circular endings. You've got this motif that's introduced in the beginning and then it pops up at the end and it gives you a whole feeling of closure. Readers react really strongly to closure. Here's another great idea for an ending. It's a matching. It opens with an image or an idea and then ends with that image or idea changing or being used differently in some way. All right, that's another great idea for an ending. And of course, let's not forget the surprise ending. Your whole story ends in a completely unexpected way. But of course, you place hints as to what is going to happen throughout the story that become clearer after the ending, but you give them the big bonk. You didn't even come close to seeing that coming. The surprise ending is fantastic if you can really surprise your readers. It's got to have a basis. It can't be out of left field. It's got to have something that when your reader reflects, they say, oh, all these other things in that story that didn't seem to add up to anything now makes sense. It's got to have an internal logic to it. But a surprise ending is a fantastic way to delight your readers. How about the trick ending? It's similar to the surprise ending, but there are no hints along the way. Something completely unexpected happens without any warning. Again, like I just warned you about a moment ago, these are a little bit tricky because it can be very easy for someone to feel a little bit like taken in by this, like cheated by this. Okay? The most popular trick ending, in my opinion, is the dream. And then he woke up and it was all a dream. After Dorothy did that in Wizard of Oz, it wasn't interesting to anybody, okay? The waking up and it's just a dream, just that on its own without any other type of explanation or irony just isn't great. It isn't great, okay? So trick endings, it's an option, but be very careful. You can end up with some really jilted readers at this point. There's the summary ending. The ends with the narrator telling the readers what happened to the characters. Jane Austen did this in her novels. If you go back to, there's a lot of movies that do that, right? I just noticed this isn't necessarily an ending, but Martin Scorsese sometimes does this in his movies, where at the end of the movie, you'll see, this person, got whacked on 13th Street. This person, fell down a manhole. Scorsese actually in The Irishman built it into a bunch of the scenes in the middle as well. Animal House, if you are doing a deep dive on one of your streaming services and decide to watch the National Lampoon classic, Animal House ends in that way, where all of the characters are reintroduced and it tells what happened to them after they graduated college. Okay. It's not a bad ending, not a bad way to wrap things up. And of course, there's the open ending. There's no closure. The reader does not know what happens to the characters. So there are some great ideas for writing endings. Basically, if you really want to know how I feel about endings, this is where you told me why you told me. This is where you make it clear. I just told you a story. Now, here's why. It wasn't just to waste your time. It wasn't just to keep you company while we're waiting for the bus. I told you a story for a reason. That conclusion should reveal that reason in some way. And I hope you're staying safe, staying healthy, and staying creative.